Hello and welcome back to Let's Chill. You already know we are the official, unofficial Minnesota Wind Chill, Minnesota Strike podcast. I'm Jeff.
I'm Jay.
And I'm Kane.
And tonight we are recapping quite a big weekend in the UFA, not only with the Wind Chill, not only with the Central Division, but just across the entire league. Um, Quick preview: Wind Chill beat the Radicals 22-17. They sit firmly on top of the Central Division in first place, and the pennant race is heating up. To kick things off, as normal, we're going to do some stall count trivia. For those of you playing along at home, you can listen to Jay as he shares his screen, as he gives us some fun trivia questions for the weekend.
Is
All right.
Captain Wait,
No way, it's Captain Jay tonight.
why is that a fish? Is there a reason for
Welcome
that,
to
or are we
stall
just
count.
just feeling
You'll see what the reason is. As presented by Captain J. Um, so the first question is what 1700 profession would me choose to be? A, a cobbler, B, a pirate, C, royalty, or D, a blacksmith. And you can forget the fact that I forgot the H. It's supposed to
A
say Smith,
blacksmith.
not Smith.
blacksmith?
Um,
Um,
it's B. It's a pirate.
it's not royalty because I know our family. I could see you being a blacksmith.
No, it's
It
B.
is in fact B, a pirate. Shout out to I think it was PK and maybe somebody
PK.
else who was there that day. But if you're watching, you know, or maybe you forgot. Who knows?
Yeah, no, we
Question
were
two:
talking about.
which of the
Wait.
following?
Are we not gonna give context for any of these, or are we just going for it?
Oh, I mean, we can give context. Yeah, sure. Um, we were at the preseason mixer in 2023 before the 2023 season. Um, and we were talking about how I would be a pirate. I don't know much more of the conversation other than that. I don't know how it
I mean,
started or how it
I
got there.
I think it started because we were drinking the Scuba, which is basically rum and limeade. Great drink at Pocket Square Cocktails, by the way. This weekend they'll have some watch parties at Pocket Square in New Hope, Minnesota. Their Scuba is made up of rum and limeade. It's amazing, and I think that's where we were drinking the Scuba, enjoying company with PK, and yeah, I think we got on the topic of rum and drinking rum and probably being pirates. I'm kind of connecting some dots here, but yeah, no,
Yeah,
that
I'm
was
not.
I was like that question was like, oh, I know this one, but why did I know this one? That's what it was from. Sorry, Kane, you weren't there. That's why you, yeah.
I just
Oh,
thought maybe
um,
you'd be good at like making swords and stuff, but yeah.
all right. Question two is which of these following titles is not a sea shanty? The titles are "Rolling Down to Old Maui," "Roll the Old Chariot Along," "Gauntlet Grubbers," and "Santiana."
okay. Have you ever heard Santiana? It's it's amazing.
I I feel like a rolling down to old Maui
The
is
way
not
Jay's looking at
that
me
is
after I
not a
said,
real sea shanty.
uh, maybe
I s-
Santiana is not the one I'm thinking of, because the Jay's giving me a look that's like, no, what are you talking about? So I'm gonna use context clues and say D is not a sea shanty, but there's a song that I'm thinking of like Santiana.
I'm I was trying to think maybe Jay's frozen
Um,
actually.
you're
Okay,
both
okay.
wrong. It's C, "Gauntlet Grubbers."
Oh, okay.
No, you said, "Have you heard the song Santiana?" And I almost said, "Give it away."
Yeah, Santiana
I
is a
don't know if
sea,
it's
sea
exactly the one you're
shanty.
thinking of, but that's an amazing song.
Yeah, it's a great sea shanty.
Yeah, it is Gauntlet Grubbers that isn't. Um, and then finally, get us wind chill related to the plot. First place.
Jay is
Is
kind of
it
cutting
three
out.
or just one win?
Okay, Jay, you're kind of cutting out, so I'm just gonna reread this question here. What is the wind chill's magic number for the playoffs? How many wins do they need to get into playoffs? Is three, two, two with a win over Chicago, 1.
For the number one place, like seeding, I'm gonna say
No,
3
just for playoff, just to get into playoffs.
Oh, mm,
That's yeah.
2 then. I'm gonna say 2.
Um, Last week it was 3 with at least one win over Chicago. And so I'm gonna say it's 2 with one win over Chicago this week.
Yeah, so Kane is right. It is 2 because
Ah,
last week, and something that I failed to analyze when I was first coming up with these rankings is they needed a win over Chicago or Madison. Beating Madison would
oh,
also put them in a spot where they could guarantee 3 wins would get them there because then Madison's max win is 8 and Minnesota would have the tiebreak against them. So I completely skipped that fact. So it is only 2 now.
yeah,
Um,
you're fired. You're witness live on the podcast. The rise and
so
fall of Jay Novak, Captain Jay. He started off so strong. All that rum. All right, going into Frisbee. I'm sure there's rum in Frisbee somehow, but
it's called
Kane,
scuba.
what Kane, bring us on track.
Okay, let's get into the recap of the Frisbee games that we watched this past weekend. Specifically, there was a Minnesota Wind Chill home game at Seafoam Stadium. We saw a bunch of you guys there, which was pretty awesome. We also got to see a 22-17 win against the Madison Radicals, which was a pretty necessary win. It was a game that we were all circling in our calendars. Big weekend. What are our initial thoughts coming away from that?
You know,
All right,
I go ahead, Jay. Go ahead.
I think step one was getting to a spot in like our standings where this game like wasn't going to be the most important game of the season. And I think pretty comfortably Minnesota like got there. If they lost this game by like a slim margin, then they still had they'd have the goals against them. They wouldn't necessarily have the tiebreak. And they would, be in second place, but it'd be like okay. But I do think like if Madison had been having any worse of a season, this game would not have been all that important whatsoever. So I think like Madison was playing so well that it almost made the game even more important than what it actually was.
Yeah, I love this rivalry. We talk about this and like I'll try to say something new because I think we say kind of the same old things, week after week. But what's interesting to me is that I was sharing my love of Frisbee with some kiddos and we were looking at the standings, the history of basically all the UFA teams. It's like, oh yeah, how were they 3 seasons ago? And so we came across Madison. And Madison is a dominant team. Like their historical record is really good. And basically, once COVID hit, after COVID, they kind of have the BCAD, like, but before COVID and after COVID, like switch. Before COVID, the Radicals were on top of the division. And that's kind of also like for context for our listeners, we followed the league at that time, but not super closely. So like us three. So I don't know if we have like a true appreciation for who the Radicals were. And like I'm speaking mostly for myself here. I didn't realize how good the Radicals were before COVID. And so after 2020, they've been kind of a weaker team, even if the games against the Wind Chill have always been close and really good and competitive. It's always like not like not influential, not like substantial games of like, oh man, if we lose this game, we're gonna drop in the standings. So to have some stake in this game, to have some weight behind this win was almost refreshing for me as a fan. Like this game truly did matter. And it was fun seeing a Radicals team who I'm like, man, that's the Radicals that the league has known. And like it's I don't know, like they're a good team. And like every time, they're doing their starting sevens is like Gabe Vordick, Anthony Gutowski, Kai Marcus, uh Victor Luo, like all these players are coming out. I'm like, holy crap, that's a scary starting seven. Like Kane and I looked at each other like, that's a scary starting seven. Um, that's my really long ramble. Like it was a good, fun win in a great environment, and there were a lot of Radicals fans there, and it was fun having our own little like intermingling with the Radicals fans.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but all the Radicals fans are always it helps make the environment at Seafoam more exciting for us as well because it almost like puts pressure on the fans to be loud. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
like you got to get involved now because those guys are cheering for up there. So that was really cool. Um, and on your point about the like Madison being more of a competition or more of
Like a
a
threat.
meaningful threat this season. Another thing that our win does is not only puts us into first place, but kind of slows down any momentum that Madison was maybe going to build after their win against the Summit. And so, I mean, we can get more into the league standing stuff later, but I think yeah, this win definitely puts Minnesota in a good place. And while I wouldn't say Madison's fully out, it does give them more of a challenge. So
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna talk about that as well, like where Madison is in the standings, and I think I'll get ahead of myself too if I open that door. But um, I going into the game a little bit, like the performance of the team. It w- First of all, let should we just start with Will Brandt? Like, should we just get that one,
yeah, it's
the
kind of
easy one
the
off
most
the list?
obvious.
Will
It's hard
Brandt finished the
to
game with like 8 assists. I don't have his whole stat line up, but I think he had a couple blocks and maybe a goal. Like I feel, let me check really fast.
yeah, I was so consumed with the 8 assist. And
Yeah.
I mean, we say it every time we talk about him, but the playmaking ability and the depth of his throws, how he can really just any situation you have, man, if you got a double team, sideline trap, if you're forcing him any side, it's really hard to be able to guard him as like a marker,
Hmm.
as a mark, because there's just no way to predict where he's going to be putting the frisbee. And there's another player that we can get to in a second, but what Bivon was saying was the handlers do a really good job of opening up for the cutters. And yeah, shout out Will Brandt for opening up those opportunities. And the 8 assists obviously speaks to his individual ability, but as a team player as well, he is an incredible impact.
Yeah. So he had 2 blocks and 0 goals, but just to round that out. But um, I don't even know if Will Brandt, like you said something about like the maybe the marks not being able to predict where he's going to throw. I think that's partly right, and I think also another part of that is Will Brandt can just adjust. Not that they can't predict it. It's like, oh, you're gonna double trap, like you're gonna sideline trap or double team me. Like that's fine because I have a high release backhand. Like that, right? Or like I can throw a scuba through you. Like not many people can. And Will Brandt, like he threw a scuba to Gordon Larson in the end zone, like for a point, and it's just like that connection. We can talk about that connection too. How they, they're longtime teammates at Saint Olaf. But like he just has, we say again this phrase, like this deep bag of throws, like the way he can break marks, like you're talking about, Caden. It's like not even fair. It's basically like he doesn't have someone on him, and so then when they have 2 people on him, like it opens up even more cutters. It opens up more options because Will Brandt like doesn't feel as much pressure from his marks.
Yeah, there was a point during the game where he got the disc, and then like within 2 seconds of the stall count, he threw a hammer, and like normally, like, I'm talking like a bomb of a hammer across the field, and normally we see hammers as these like reserved throws for you got to get out of this situation, you have a double team, and that was like his go-to. He's not afraid
Yep.
to throw these hard to make throws because they're not hard to make for him. So, like you're saying, if they're giving him a double team, well, that's just as efficient as putting one person on him. So now there's someone open on the field, and he can just throw that instant hammer. 2 seconds stall count, it's off.
is it premature or immature of me to say that like Will Brandt represents the next generation of Ultimate? I think, or in the sense that like a lot of older players, I think reaction to Will Brandt's play style is, he's kind of wild. Like it's incredible and it's unorthodox, right? But I feel like personally, as someone who's playing right now, who's on the scene a little bit more, I think a lot more people are starting to adapt play styles more close to Will Brandt. So I wonder if, he is kind of leading the next phase, if he's pioneering the play style that's going to be needed, because a lot of teams in the league are putting up similar, if not the same, like defenses and offenses. And at a certain point, you're going to have to adapt. And so Will Brandt as an individual is kind of an example of that. So just a little interjection there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's premature by any means. Like we've talked about again on the pod, like he plans on being a leader on this team. I wrote about it in my, kind of rookie up and coming article. Like I asked him before I wrote that article, I was like, are you gonna be around the Twin Cities for the next couple of years? Like, are you planning on going to grad school? Anything like that that's not gonna put you on the wind chill? He said for at least the next couple of years, he's gonna be here. So he absolutely is a building block on the wind chill. He's absolutely a like mark of what's to come in the sport. I think it also almost he reminds me a little bit of Robin Fennig. Um, he's basically like the Winchell's Robin Fennig, I think, where like he just has this confidence about him that he can go like Jay was saying, he can go to that throw, that unorthodox, I can't say like the unorthodox throw, like the hammer, which personally I think a hammer being an unorthodox throw is just kind of silly. Like throw the hammer, but it is like opinions aside. Yeah, you throw a flick and you move on down the field. Um, but him, that's if that's his primary throw coming out of a timeout or something is unique. And again, that's Robin Fennick. She's like, yeah, throw a hammer, throw what's gonna get that disc down into the end zone. Doesn't matter how it's gonna get there. Um, yeah, it's really cool to see. And like I think too, like you were saying, Kane, like being the leader on the field and being the playmaker is not an easy role to step into. Like that takes a very specific kind of person. And Will Bryant is that person. Like I think he's kind of shy and awkward on the sideline. Like when we're interviewing him, it's like, oh yeah, he's kind of humble, like, oh yeah, all these things and kind of skirts around some answers. But like on the field where it matters, where it counts, Will Bryant is that guy, and they will look to him and be like, where do you want? Where do you want me to go? What's your throw? What's the plan? Yeah, it's cool to see. I think
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm calling it now. I'm calling it now. June 25th, 2024. Will Brandt is going to sometime in the next 3 years get league MVP. I'm not maybe not
yeah,
this season, but either in the 25, 26, or 27 season, Will Brandt is getting MVP at least once.
he has to, right? Like, I mean, honestly, and again, I don't want to go on a rant against the UFA. Like, this is not what I'm about, but like, I'm surprised Bevon hasn't really been considered for that either. Like, I think Bevon is a perennial MVP favorite. Again, separate rant, separate podcast. But yeah, I agree, Jay. Like, Will Brandt is the quarterback, and quarterbacks are almost always picked as MVP. They're the name of the organization or the face of the organization, and Will Brandt stepping up in the biggest way possible. Like every week, we're like, oh man, look what he did this week. And then the next week, it's like, wait, he just did it again. There's no way he's going to top this. And then the next week, it's like, he just did it again and did it in a doubleheader weekend or something like
He
that.
really
Like,
puts up like video game numbers for sure. Like his stat line on the UFA game is gonna go crazy.
if
Like,
the UFA game gets released, yeah.
yeah, 2037.
Let's call Tim
Yeah,
DeBile about that.
no, let's actually do that. Honestly, okay, side note, I would really, really like to get into like sports games on like consoles and stuff if there was a frisbee game. I think that'd be cool. Because like I don't see the appeal. I don't really care about it. But if there was a frisbee one, I would.
I mean, like the UFA game was supposed to be that game. I think they had it on PC and console and everything. Like and they were like beta testing it or alpha testing it last year. And yeah, I don't know. We can.
What the real
And
question is, what are we getting first? UFA the game or GTA 6?
We're getting the Detroit Mechanics win before either.
Dude, we got the Detroit Mechanics winning before GTA 6.
oh my gosh, we're not even gonna get into the Detroit Mechanics stuff right yet.
Not yet, but we will.
Um, but no,
Other,
let's
oth-
what were you gonna say? Sorry.
well, I was gonna kind of put us back on track a little bit, really quickly because I have a couple of stat talking points I want to get to, but just really quick, a couple other shout outs. Tristan Van Mortel and Gordon Larson also like had games to be proud of. Just off on our own texts, we had like predictions, player predictions, and I just said like, yeah, I think Will Brandt will have a good game, but I'm gonna go with Van de Mortel as my player of the game. And he had I think 3 or 4 assists. Like he also went off if Will Bryant wasn't in the game, like he would have had like a very notable game. Let's not pussyfoot around that. And then Gordon Larson had 1 assist, 3 goals, and a block. Which also like a phenomenal pairing with a player like Will Bryant, longtime teammates in college. Gordon Larson is up and coming, not up and coming. He's here, like he's here. Um,
Right. I mean,
again,
this
just
is
just
probably the third game now that we've seen where he's been a really significant part in again playmaking, in getting those midfield cuts, in getting the point when you have to get that little point there. So uh yeah, I know we definitely spend a lot of time on them, but it's definitely notable.
yeah, for sure. Okay. I want to go a little bit into some stats. My first stat that I want to point out for the game is really not a good one, and it's kind of on a storyline we've been following throughout the season, is that their huck percentage was abysmal on Saturday. They were just 2 for 11 on hucks, which is their lowest by any like I mean, I guess I don't have all the numbers pulled up, but they completed 2 hucks. Um, while the Radicals had 12 out of 20. They had a 60% huck percentage. Um, but with that said, they had a 95% red zone conversion percentage and 93% convert or completion. So like for those who are tuning out when I just put out numbers like that, the Winchell were not able to look deep on Saturday. They were not landing the long passes, but they were really efficient otherwise. They were completing passes. When they got close to the end zone, they were knocking it in. Like this stat has kind of been balancing. They are either really good at one and really bad at the other, or really, or flipped. This whole season, we've kind of been seeing that.
I think a big part of a big part of that, like that's a positive, is it really does show their ability to adjust to what the game is situation is. They went 2 for 11 on hucks, which is like not good. It's awful actually. But then they kind of threw fewer hucks in the second half. It felt like, and they kept punching in scores from the red zone. When they needed to have their red zone conversion percentage higher, they had a higher red zone conversion percentage. When their red zone conversion percentage isn't doing the greatest, if they're playing against a team that's better at defense in that area, they're hucking it so they don't need to play in that area. So I think they're really good at adapting to opposing teams' defenses and playing against the opposing team the way the opposing team doesn't want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is a really mature Winchell team that, like, I think they are in their prime of team skill, mentality, and like uh, smarts, I guess, for lack of a better word. I think Bevon was quoted in one of Evan Lepler's articles today, just saying how more or less, playoff experience and championship weekend experience last season has changed how this team operates on the field and off the field. And Jay, I think that's exactly right. Like they adjust. They're not like, and this is gonna go into my next stat, so we can open that up too. But like they don't just like, oh shoot, our hucks aren't working, but like that's our game. We gotta do better. And their halftime is like, okay, if so and so is not landing the huck, then someone else has to go in there. Like they're not trying to changed the same game plan. They're adjusting their entire strategy, which is working.
Yeah, the Windchill are definitely a very reactive team on both offense and defense, which is good because especially for like when the defense has to switch over to playing offense and then you have to react to a different setup of defense. So, I mean, Frisbee is obviously a very, very complicated game. And so the ability of the team quarter to quarter and play to play to adjust how they're moving their pieces and uh, adjusting each line to fit the style of play that how they're going to do it. I mean, we saw roller pulls on both sides of the fields. We saw back of the end zone pulls, and each of those is a different style of play that they're going for. And so it's really, uh, I wouldn't say a good sign necessarily. I think that's, well, yeah, it's a good sign, but necessary. It is a necessary quality of a championship team. I don't think it's like, the first time a
Yeah.
team has ever been like this.
Yeah, I think the league is doing the Winchell a favor this year of giving them two out of division games across two different like divisions. Also, like they get to play Colorado Summit in the West, and then they get to play the East Division against New York Empire, which again force them win or lose or whatever, forces them to adjust to different play styles, different opponents. Like you can kind of like, oh yeah, I know how I'm going to match up against Anthony Gutowski. I play him 2 or 3 times a season, every season, blah 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 blah. But it's like, okay, we see the Empire once. This is how we have to attack them, and this is how we have to adjust. You can't adjust game to game, week to week. You adjust quarter to quarter, Kane, like you were saying, minute to minute, like play. Um, so the fact that they're doing it against their divisional opponents, but then they get chances to do it if they're out of division opponents too, really does set them up for success at championship weekend. And I'm not even gonna say if they make it to championship weekend because we know that they will. So, um, moving on to my next stat, then that opens it up is that their points by quarter. I did a deep dive. I was sending you guys stuff over the weekend of like, I nerded out so much on stats, and specifically I focused on points by quarter. Without getting too much into it, you can go check out our Instagram account and Twitter and Facebook. We have just a graphic of like how many points or not on average, total points the Winchell score per quarter or have scored per quarter this season. Geez, and how many their opponents have scored. To sum it up, the the second half of games for the Winchell, they score more than half their points. They score 53.4% of their points in the second half. And their opponents score 65.4% of their points in the second half, which I think is interesting. Like both the Winchell and their opponents are stronger in the second half. Specifically, the Winchell are strongest so far this season in the third quarter. They have scored 38 of their total points in the third quarter. Um, I have more to say about that, but my voice is getting raspy, so someone take it from here and I'll build on that.
Jay, go for it if you're got something to say.
Oh yeah. So I almost disagree with Jeff's assessment. Like it's statistically accurate. Like yes, they
Disagree
score
with
the
numbers.
most. They score the most in the second half. They score the most in the third quarter, and their opponents score the most in the second half as well. But that's like results based analysis, and we're not looking at like actual like stepwise based analysis. I think the wind chill do significantly better in the first two quarters than they do in the second two quarters. And I say that because in the first two quarters, they score more points than their opponents do by more than in the second two quarters, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Um, other than the third
margin,
quarter,
the point differential you're saying.
I was gonna say the margin.
yeah. So the point differential in the second half of the game is 5 points per quarter on average. And then for the first half of the game, it's like, let me do that math real quick. It's 6 or 7. So it's slightly higher in the first half of the game. And I think that, and I keep bringing it back to what Mattis was saying, and like what we like to see is when a defense can really like tire out on the O line and really make them stay out there, really make them fight for points. But then also Minnesota is getting a lot of holds in those points as well. So they're
Jay, we lost you, but King, do you have something to add?
Um, see
back against
that
those defensive points. So they're scoring less, really good to see as well.
yeah, I guess I honestly don't have much to add because I was gonna agree with you and be like, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then that analysis kind of made everything I had to say kind of seem
I
lame.
think I think also like Jay's analysis is absolutely super important to say. And I was talking with my buddy over the weekend too about we were talking about baseball stats and how Moneyball and all that stuff. And like some stats are worth looking at, and some stats are just happenstance stats. Like hit by pitch, for example. Like someone has to be the player who gets hit by pitch more, whether or not they're really good at it, whether or not that's a valuable thing to bring to a team. Like, and we can debate that, and we're not going to, but like at some point, someone just has to be that stat just has to exist. Same with this stat to an extent. Like one of their quarters has to be the one where they score the most points, unless they do happen to score the same amount of points throughout the entire game. So yeah, to an extent, take this with a grain of salt, but then also on top of that, build with what Jay was saying and say they beat their opponents in the first half more than they beat their opponents in the second half, which is valuable. Like yeah. Because again, their opponents are kind of catching their second win in the second half. This is something that I reached out to Jimmy Kittleson just to get his opinion. I was like, hey, you guys are scoring more than half your points in the second half, and your opponents are too. I'm just going to read his response, his whole response. Jimmy says about that. This year, we've been striving to be focused and efficient in all 4 quarters. Going into the second half, we've had time to learn tendencies of matchups on defense and know what's working to generate blocks. If we manage to be consistent in the first half, our offense is deadly going into the third quarter because they're dialed in and comfortable. My guess to why opponents are scoring more second half is due to urgency. Halftime gives teams to reflect and change strategy, which is often score faster and increase pressure. This leads to more hucks and goals, but also more chaos and turnovers. So, to +1 on Jay, that actually really, I think Jimmy actually kind of said what Jay was trying to say. That the Wind Chill are beating teams more in the first half, like Jay was saying. So I think their opponents are more urgent. They feel like they need to catch up more. And so they kind of overcompensate. They play a little bit more. They have a little bit more pressure underneath them. Which, yeah, like totally makes sense. I'm not going to pull it up right now. Well, maybe I will because it's going to take me 2 seconds. But I looked up like turnovers by quarter as well because he said, oh, it leads to more turnovers in the second half. So I looked up second half throwaways for opponents does average to be a little bit more. And so it does for the Wind Chill too. There are more throwaways and turnovers in the second half of games. For both teams. And again, you can also contribute that to fatigue and just like mental state and physical fatigue too. But yeah, I think there's an urgency. There's more of a dogfight at the end, and games get a little sloppier. But I just thought it was really interesting. That was the rabbit hole I went down this weekend. Um, and it was true on Saturday too, with the Radicals. The Wind Chill scored 13 goals in the second half, and they scored 9 goals in the first half. So just like a fun like stat to follow throughout the season. And yeah, I appreciate like Jay saying like they beat teams more in the first half, which is important.
Let's
Man,
talk
my
about
voice.
the most epic thing that has happened in possibly UFA, most likely sports history. Um, Fellas, the Detroit Mechanix won.
Who?
Won. The Detroit Mechanix professional ultimate frisbee team.
That is awesome. That was like the best moment on Saturday. Again, sorry to all the other teams. I really I love how much the league is giving this attention. Like again, Evan Lepler wrote 2/3 of his articles today about Detroit, and rightfully so. Like we as a collective ultimate community have basically said one thing about the Detroit Mechanics for the last 7 years. So the fact that they deserve this. That was so cool.
And they have cool jerseys. You know what? Go check out my tier list video. I like their jerseys.
Ow. I just hit my elbow against my table. Ow. Um,
Jay, you're hired
that
again.
that hurt, but probably not as much as it hurt to lose against the Detroit Mechanics. Um,
Wait. I don't wait. I want to revel in the Detroit Mechanics first before we crap on the Thunderbirds because I do want to crap on the Thunderbirds too.
We will for sure
Okay.
crap on the Thunderbirds.
we will in
Let's-
fact crap on the Thunderbirds, but I also do want to say that the Detroit Mechanics not only like won for the first time in a while, it wasn't like it was a messy game. They had like 11 turns. Like that's a low turn game by like most margins. Like that they played well. Like if they played that well, they would be a legitimate threat against Minnesota this weekend.
That's the thing. Like, I don't know if you guys read any of Lepler's articles, but like there's a couple storylines here. And just to sum them up really quickly, one, the Thunderbirds were running a skeleton crew, like to the point where their GM actually played. They were without like 9 of their starters, something like that. And even with that in mind, like the mechanics, the style of play, their mental fortitude, like they all said like there was something when they woke up that morning. And again, like you can romanticize it and be like looking back, oh yeah, when I woke up, I was feeling magical. But like it was like scary consistent, the stories that everyone in the mechanics is saying of like, nah, today is the day that we're gonna win. Um, right, Jay, to your point, not only was this a fluke, like, oh yeah, we won on a buzzer beater because they had a skeleton crew, like we had the fewest turnovers in our club history. We won by the largest margin in our club history. They won by 11 points. I think they've only won by double digits like one other time in their entire history. Like they were connecting on all fronts. And like, yes, they still did have kind of a lot of turnovers. Individuals had a lot of turnovers. Um, Again, you can nitpick all the bad, but again, when they haven't won in 7 years, like you can only revel in the good. And just like I think, like you were saying, Jay, even if the Thunderbirds weren't running a skeleton crew, they probably would have won this game, I think. And again, you can play what if, but they look
Yeah,
like a legitimate team.
yeah, I think the 'cause I ended up watching some of the game while we were at the wind chill game. I had it like playing on my phone, and like play after play, it was like good ultimate. And I don't know, that sounds like the bare minimum, I guess, but like it was like watching just like any other team. And so I think we've kind of made a narrative over the past few years, especially the last couple years here, as the streak has like really gotten up, that the mechanics are just like bad frisbee players. And I know there's been like player chatter last year. I remember there was some like trash talk and stuff. And so just like seeing firsthand the mechanics get a victory and get it in a way that like shows like, hey, like we're here, like we're present. This is an official, legitimate organization here. As someone who, to a lesser extent, like Minnesota, has been in that position. Obviously, we weren't ever to like that at full extent, but it's good to see the underdog win. You know, you're always rooting for them. So,
Yeah, I know.
go
I made
mechanics.
jokes that night, but I was being serious. Like we're all mechanics fans tonight. Like I don't think there was a single person. And like again, we can crap on the Thunderbirds today, but like that's so cool. And we talked about this. I don't know if it was on pod or off pod, but like we're not really gonna remember the Thunderbirds as being a bad team who lost to the Mechanics and lost the streak. It's more you like the victor writes history, and the victor was the Mechanics, and it's the Mechanics beat their streak, not that the Thunderbirds lost to the streak. And it's just like again, just to like quickly, two quick things, Jassy, you're up next. One, like they've brought
teams within the Central Division within 1 point. Like they've had close games, like you were saying, Kane. It's not like that every game they've played is a blowout. Like they almost beat the Alley Cats. They lost by 1 in Indy last year. So again, like that's not like, oh wow, the Mechanics have always lost by 20 every game. Two, something I just want to call this out. That was really cool. Mentioned in Lepler's article was that um there were 3 players on the Mechanics team who passed away in 2020 in a car accident. Um, and for a couple years, this team, got together in a circle and would say their names and would say their numbers and just like honor them. I don't know if it was before every practice or after every game or whatever it was, but they kind of like that had kind of fizzled out. The turnover among the team had been significant enough that no one really knew who these players were anymore and stuff like that. Um, but just like on Saturday night, they were saying like whenever they beat the streak, they would beat it for those 3 players. That's like Saturday night, like they just got into the circle again and they did that. And like you can only imagine what those emotions were like and like that moment for that team had just been so powerful and amazing. So like congratulations, Detroit. You deserve it.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what I was going to talk about. Because I know the uh, Pittsburgh team tweeted out after the fact how like they held that moment of silence. Like they took their loss. Like the streak was going to end against somebody. Pittsburgh was okay with it being them. Obviously they didn't want to lose, but the way they handled it and the way like they celebrated with the Mechanics afterwards as well.
Yeah.
It was big even for the team that got beat.
And let's be honest, Pittsburgh was the only team that could lose to Detroit.
It was always going to be Pittsburgh, right?
We knew it was going to be Pittsburgh.
I kind of thought it might have been Indy.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. They had a close game last year because the league was like, oh, maybe we'll think it's going to be Indy. We knew it's Pittsburgh. They're in the Central Division because they're Pittsburgh.
I mean, yeah, I'll be honest. Last season, especially, every time they played Pittsburgh, I was like, I'm checking the Mechanics score. But again, that was last season. This season is chaos season. Anything goes. Literally, there are no rules. There are no rules this season. With all due respect, I think the Empire have 3 losses. Maybe they just have 2 losses. The Mechanics have a win. Pittsburgh beat Minnesota. Pittsburgh beat the Radicals in Chicago. Like anything goes. So this season, I guess I did not necessarily expect them to beat Pittsburgh, but like every weekend, I'm like, I don't freaking know what's going to happen. So,
Yeah, you guys are talking about how you were watching that game a little bit on your phones during the wind chill game. I'm on my phone. Like I'm not even joking. Like I know where I was the minute that clock ticked to 0. I jumped off my couch. Like even though
we
even though
made
they
a
won by like
sign.
even though they won by 11, I was still like tense to the very last second until that clock hit 0. We did not know that the Mechanics were going to win that game.
There was like 4
I
minutes left, and they were up by like 7, I think, at that point. And I was like, oh my God, there's gonna be a comeback, isn't there? I was like, oh no.
I love the last final seconds of the game where they kind of look around, and not that they like don't know victory, not like they, again, I don't want to like patronize them at all, but like they're like, wait, this it. Like stall count is higher than time clock, game's over, kind of thing. And they kind of like looked around and realized that's game, which is awesome. We made a sign at the game that just said Mechanics won, and like everyone's like, wait, really? Really? They thought we were like messing with them. Like, no, they did it. Oh, which was awesome. Moving on, we do have to move on. We're getting a little long-winded, but again, shout out to Detroit. We really wanted to spend some time on that game and that moment, share that moment with them. So congratulations, Detroit Mechanics. Um, with all due respect, we hope to start a new streak next weekend, or at least a 1-game losing streak next weekend as we play you. But the East Division, going to the East Division, this is our only other league news. The entire East Division playoff standings, not standings, but playoff teams are set. Seeding's not there yet, but the 3 teams that will be playing in the playoffs are the New York Empire, the DC Breeze, and the Boston Glory, which are not surprising. Those have been the teams in the East for a couple of seasons. But as of right now, the teams are mixed up, and we don't know seeding, and that I think is very exciting.
I think the East is like the opposite of the Central Division. in the sense that like there has been very clearly a dominant force and like it's been pretty consistent of like the rankings. And this year, obviously, with Boston
Mhm.
and coming up a little bit, but I don't know. I think it's interesting that it's those three teams again. Um, Personally, I think DC is going to be going all the way this year. I think now that the Empire streak has broken, DC will be able to kind of come out of that shadow a little bit because they've been
Mhm.
the perennial contender. They've always been that like just one overtime point away from being a championship weekend. So
They've been the little brother to the Empire.
Yeah, I think the Empire
I'm better than
losing this
both of
year
you at
is
Frisbee.
okay. Shut up,
Continue, Jay.
Ken. I think the Empire losing this year is like akin to the Mechanics winning. Like if
Yes.
the Mechanics won, and now we kind of expect that they can win again. Like we all sort of knew like, oh yeah, this team's gonna lose. But now that they have a win, it's like, oh yeah, they can win now. Like if the Mechanics
Hmm.
were to beat the Alley Cats, it'd be like, oh yeah, the Mechanics, it's an upset for sure. But and it's sort of the same thing with
Right.
like the Empire with Empire bleeding, like losing. It's like gods do bleed. It's like, oh wait, these guys can lose. Oh, let's go beat them. So I feel like this year DC is going to. I honestly think that DC is going to the championship weekend. I think Boston will get first place in the division, but I think that DC is going to beat them out in playoffs.
Hmm.
And the only reason I think Boston's getting first place in the division is because Carolina's beating DC this weekend.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it definitely opens the door to possibilities. The Mechanics winning, the Empire losing. Like I said 2 minutes ago, anything's possible. Anything goes. There's no rules anymore. And like, here's a transition to our weekly forecast. Dun-dun-dun. Um, Minnesota's playing Mechanics at during their second game of a doubleheader weekend, and like, it's like you said, Jay. It would be a major upset if the Mechanics won, but now it's a possibility. And again, it always was a possibility, but it really wasn't. And if we're being honest, now that they got that first win, it really is a possibility. And it really is a game that they need to take seriously. But before they need to take that game seriously, they are traveling to Chicago to play the Union, which like let's get into that preview Chicago Union game first. That Winchell need 2 games to secure playoffs participation, playoff presence. What am I saying? Um, and yeah, I think the Union are probably one of the biggest threats to the Winchell right now. Um, and in Chicago, like that's kind of an iffy environment.
Um, I think Chicago is probably our second biggest threat. I think Madison still is honestly our biggest threat. I really
Hmm.
do. Madison, the game against them showed like a really deep roster on their end, one that I feel like Chicago and Indy just don't have. Like I don't feel like they have the amount of personnel that can go into a championship weekend or even, finish off like a Central Division like playoff run.
Right.
Um, but obviously a loss to Chicago here, Jay, I don't know what standing they would be in, but it would put them at a win over us, which considering everything else going on in the Central Division could again be the make or break. Every game on this point on could be a deciding factor. So we have to take every game and treat it like that.
Chicago beating us this weekend would put them at second place. Um, they are currently at second place. We'd still be in first. Minnesota would have to lose to both Chicago and Detroit this weekend to fall out of first place. And Chicago would have to beat Minnesota by more than Minnesota beat them in their first matchup. So I think by 5.
And it's worth noting that the Winchell play Chicago one more time, and they don't play the Radicals anymore this season. So we swept the Radicals, which is big. We have the head to head there. Um, and so we needed to beat Chicago once, not to make playoffs, but to have the head to head to maybe again, they've not cement first place necessarily, but to give us the edge for sure.
The
So
home field advantage in the yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Also, I totally disagree with Kane. I think the Union have a much healthier roster than the Radicals do. Not that the Radicals have a bad roster, but one of like a couple of their players, I'm not gonna name anyone too specifically, had 7 assists and a -5 plus minus because he had like 12 throwaways. Um, I feel like Chicago has a bit more refined play style. They don't necessarily make mistakes like that. You can still capitalize on their weaknesses. You can still, play good defense against them, but they're not making mistakes so much as they are giving you windows to capitalize on them.
Mhm.
So I feel like Chicago's the team, especially with Madison in the rear view, the team that we're have to be most afraid of, the team that will be our biggest contender for first place in the division.
Yeah.
That's
So
fair. I guess for I wasn't really considering the fact that we did just beat Madison in our head to head. So there's that.
couple players to note as we did last weekend. Sam Berglund is not rostered, just straight up, not even dressed or anything. So noted there. Otherwise, Quinn Snyder is also not rostered. And Matt Rader is out still. Also, Tanner Barkis is listed as out. So I'm not sure there, but otherwise it looks like a fairly healthy full roster for the wind chill, which is good to see. Again, especially doubleheader weekend, especially in Chicago. Like we're coming with a pretty good group. I'd like to see Raider back in there. Obviously like to see Barkis and Snyder and Berglund. Um, but like I think this lineup is definitely capable. Um, the only notable absence, I guess I'm just going based on a couple players I know. The only notable absence I'm seeing from the Union's roster is Joe White. Um, and looking, does he even have a game with the Union this season? Like his stat sheet only has from last season, he has 2023, which I thought he
Uh,
had played with the Union.
I'm pretty sure he has not played with the Union this year. I think I'm almost positive he hasn't, and I think that's because we're getting Joe White mixed up with Jeff Weiss.
Right. I probably am a little bit, but I also thought like Joe White was like, like a big name, big addition to the team. And like, I know there's a lot of questions like, oh, well, if he plays, if he's rostered, but like, I thought, oh yeah, he's, got weddings every other weekend or something, but never going to play a game. So I don't know, interesting. Like, but that is all to say, they're coming with a fairly strong full roster. Like they're not missing us, bunch of significant pieces. So like, this is going to be a true like head to head battle, I think.
I mean, Chicago historically has been the team that was like the big brother, it was the
Yeah.
New York Empire to the DC Breeze. And so loss here, I feel like might set us on a track kind of to repeat history a little bit, whereas a victory here would really, really cement us in that first place. Not only like literally, but I think it would act as a way to set the team on a new path where they can sort of let go of the Central Division and start to focus on championship weekend, right? We've crossed the midpoint of the season, and now we have to start refining that roster and refining the play style to be able to go up against out of division opponents in a real high intensity setting. So this game could definitely mean a lot.
Yeah, like this is a bitter rivalry. There's some bad memories in recent years, especially for Winchell fans. But again, like look at last year, the Union did beat Minnesota once last year, but otherwise it really they did kind of come off as a non-threat to the Winchell. So hopefully like that kind of keeps up. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a close game. Like honestly, not to be pessimistic, but to be, I think, realistic. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Union won. They also have a lot to play for, especially now with the division kind of opening up. This is their chance. This is their chance to get first place. If they can beat us, and they're counting on maybe the Empire beating us, like
I think this game for the Union opens up a lot of doors and a lot of like possibilities. So yeah, like be ready. I mean, not us, we don't have to be ready, but like it'll be really interesting to see this game how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled for this game. You did briefly mention the Empire game and like Chicago relying on the Empire beating us. That made me think like Minnesota has already been doing so good this season and like doing so well, like playing all their matchups. They had that one really off game to Pittsburgh, but who cares? Um, and like they've looked really strong, really solid against every team that they've played so far. And it makes me think with the Empire having 3 losses this year, I'm more confident than ever that Minnesota can beat this Empire team as well.
Yeah, that game I'm really looking forward to. Like a couple weeks down the line, that's gonna be like freaking electric. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the Empire game at home at TCO Stadium, which could be the new home, maybe down the line. We'll see. That's gonna be a fun game. This weekend, however, like we said, there are 2 away games. Jeff mentioned it at the top of the pod, but Pocket Square Cocktail Lounge, is that like the official name
Yep.
in Minneapolis or St. Paul?
New Hope.
Okay. New Hope. Yeah, if you guys want to join, I'm not going to be there, but maybe Jeff or Jay will be there to
I'm
cheer on the
I'm gonna
Minnesota
try, but we'll
teams.
see.
Yeah,
I would love to be.
I'm 20, so you know
Well,
what?
yeah,
Maybe
you
I'll
can
go.
go.
Maybe I'll go. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Either way, we'll be cheering on the doubleheader weekend, and then is it the week after or the week after
Yep,
after
July
is that
6th, that 4th of July
okay?
weekend. It's a whiteout against the Union.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like our third matchup with the Union, that's gonna be a really big game. No matter what happens this weekend, that game's gonna be even more important. So show up to Seafoam on July 6th. Yeah, otherwise, also just really quickly, let us know if you guys wanted to do mailbag. There was a lot of interest at the beginning of the season. There was some interest when we actually did it, and then it fizzled out. So send us DMs, comment, all that stuff. We'll put a poll out on our Instagram story too. But shout out R1P1 Network, continuing to do the most with our YouTube and thumbnails, social media graphics, podcast backgrounds, all that good stuff. Really appreciate them. Um, Again, follow us on Instagram, check us out on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube, and re-listen to this episode on Spotify. In the meantime, stay chilly and ka-chow.
Stay chilly. Ciao.
Ka-chow.